Hey guys, welcome back to the Jason Goldberg is Ruining Podcasting podcast. And on today's show, I'm going to ruin anger. Anyways, from fender benders to lost business to a friend or family member doing you wrong to walking my dog and accidentally grabbing a handful of poop with my bare hand because I didn't realize there was a huge hole in the poop bag. I wish these were hypothetical examples. We all know what it feels like to be aggravated and agitated, to lash out or close down, and to lose our cool worse than Bill O'Reilly prepping for a live show.
No. We'll do it live. It. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Now listen, you don't have to get to old sweet Billy Boy's level of anger to know how much damage anger can cause in our lives. The target of our anger might be another human who did something wrong or committed a crime against your own personal humanity. You may be the type that takes your anger out on inanimate objects. That was my target of choice. More on that in a minute. Or the most damaging target, ourselves, which happens by default even when the initial target is someone or something else. When we are being puppeteered by anger, we diminish our own experience of life and we just aren't ourselves. Now, you might be thinking that if you aren't someone who yells or screams or breaks stuff when you get upset, then it means you aren't affected by anger. But the truth is, that's only one of two ways that anger shows up. If you were someone who was taught early on in life that anger bad, or at least that's the way the Hulk's parents said it, you may have learned to cope with it by stuffing it deep down so as not to actually experience it. And God forbid it's ever expressed out loud because that would make you a tyrant. An uncontrollable monster who will never be successful. But just like binging on Taco Bell at 2 o'clock in the morning, while you may not see the damage being caused, I promise it's happening, and eventually it will come out in a messy way. Now, before we dive deeper, let me just say quickly what this episode is not about. It's absolutely not about not feeling anger. I know, a terribly constructed double negative this early on in the show, not a good sign. And if that made you angry, good, it was strategic. I want to give you something real to play with in real time. What I mean is that anger is not inherently bad, and your feelings are never wrong. The challenge becomes when we think that the feeling of anger is also the most effective guide as to what we should do. Alan Watts talks about how anger can be viewed in the same way a sailor views the wind. Whether he wants to sail with it or against it, he always uses it. He never denies the wind. And as Tim Robbins said in the movie Thanks for Sharing, feelings are like children. You don't want them driving the car, but you shouldn't stuff them in the trunk either. We can choose how we use the feeling of anger, but we must try not to deny that we feel it. The biggest takeaway here is that the feeling and expression of anger does not immediately have to inform the action we take against ourselves or anyone else. And I know that seems impossible when it feels like there's a mosh pit circa 1997 Warped Tour going on inside your head. And you feel like cartoonish steam is about to come out of your ears. But I promise it's possible. To be a self-leader and be more chill even when the hits the fan. Now, it's often said that you can learn more about alcoholism from a recovering alcoholic than from someone who merely studied alcoholism. Which is why I'm the perfect person to talk to you about anger, because I had massive anger issues growing up. See, I was the kid very early on that when I lost my temper or things weren't going my way, I would punch holes in walls. I remember there was a time as an adult where I had a difficult conversation with a boss on the phone, and when I hung up the phone, I took my $600 smartphone and threw it against the wall, smashing it into a million pieces. I remember also being somebody who anytime I got cut off in traffic, I would just lose my mind. And I remember dating a woman at one point where we're driving down the road, we get cut off by another car, and I go into a fit of rage. And she asked me, "Why do you do that? Why do you respond that way when something so innocent like somebody cutting you off in traffic happens?" And I said to her what I now call my 6-word death sentence: "That's just the way I am." Now, I've had to do a lot of work to get to be the man who I am today, who of course still experiences anger. Remember, we aren't trying to deny our feelings. We're just working to become more effective at navigating them. But now, based on a lot of what I'm going to share with you today, anger is not nearly the detriment to my life as it used to be. Having any kind of recurring rage or anger, whether blown up or buried down, can lead to high blood pressure, ulcers, irreparable damage to our relationships, and worst of all, it costs us our peace and happiness. Two things that are our birthright and should never be sacrificed because of our inability to navigate our less productive emotions. We can easily get knocked off track when things aren't going our way, no matter how big or small they may be. And even if it's only by 2 millimeters, that 2 millimeters over time can take us 2 light years from where we otherwise could have been. But if you can catch it quickly, then you can shift back those tiny 2 millimeters in the moment and be back on track without any significant damage or deviation from the life you want to live. Now, I always want this show to be focused on transformation and not just information. So before we go any further, I want you to take a second and think about something that has you upset or angry right now, something that might be robbing you of your peace and joy, that's creating hardships where your happiness would otherwise live. And if nothing's present for you now, and my double negative didn't really set you off, think of something that recently derailed you. It may or may not have the same charge now as it did when it happened, but see if you can bring it back to your present experience. It could be something as small as someone not holding the elevator door for you while you're rushing towards the door, flailing your arms like the androgynous inflatable person at a used car lot, or something as large as feeling betrayed, rejected, or otherwise wronged by somebody in your world. Got it? Okay, dope. So let's talk about some of my favorite ways to stop the hijack and shift your anger into autonomy, your rage into responsibility, and your fury into fuel. The first thing I want to share with you can, in many situations, be all you need to be able to get into a more effective headspace. Effective because remember, it's not about good or bad or right or wrong when it comes to your feelings. It's just how we use or are used by those feelings. It's something that's been a fan favorite at my keynote speeches and trainings for years, and it's my distinction of nuclear reactor versus first responder. These are two different lenses through which we can see and identify how we might, by default or by choice, react in any given situation that might cause us anger. Now, you're probably all familiar with a nuclear reactor, but in case you aren't, a nuclear power plant that has nuclear reactors is harnessing all this crazy volatile nuclear energy. They actually have to employ entire teams of people to overlook these different plants to make sure they don't explode and kill everybody for miles and miles around.
He runs to warn the control room, but there's nothing he can do to stop what is coming.
And the same thing happens in our bodies and in our minds when we allow anger to turn us into nuclear reactors. It feels volatile, you feel tightness in your chest, you feel heat all over your body, and you can't make good decisions. So, unless you're a glutton for self-punishment, my guess is that a nuclear reactor is probably not on your vision board. So then what's the alternative? Well, for that we turn to the brave souls of fire, police, and medical, the so-called first responders. Now, I'm going to admit, I'm a little bit obsessed with medical dramas and police dramas. I like New Amsterdam, The Good Doctor, The Resident, Chicago PD. I'm into all these shows. But I remember when I first started watching them and seeing them get on the scene of a catastrophe, a natural disaster, having an emergency room that's buzzing with chaos, and noticing how cool, calm, and collected they were in the face of all of that craziness. I remember thinking that in the midst of all that uncertainty and the threat of real danger, imagining how I could ever possibly respond with such a calm demeanor. But I realized that was a choice. So, as you can probably see, being a first responder doesn't shield you from experiencing situations that can cause you to have anger or any other uncomfortable emotions. It simply has you see and process those situations in a more effective way, from a place of calm, courageous, creative consciousness. God, I love alliteration. So if we can agree that first responder is our goal, even if you decide not to watch the rest of this episode, the next time you feel the emotional hijack of anger coming up and it looks like the nuclear reactor is about to blow, see if you can pause long enough to ask yourself how you might act differently if you were playing the role of a first responder. Surveying the situation and seeing what parts of your training you need to call upon that would be most helpful to the situation. Okay, so if you are sticking around for the rest of the episode, hi Mom, I want to dive deeper and share some powerful tools and insights that can help you make that switch in the moment from nuclear reactor to first responder. So step one is to triage your thinking. Just like a real first responder who's surveying the situation, seeing where they're needed most, where they need to direct their energy and focus and attention, and not being distracted by what might be the most urgent thing so they can figure out what is actually the most urgent thing, we can do the same exact thing when we feel a sense of anger starting to surface. Look around at your thoughts, the ones that are trying their hardest to get your attention, and notice them just as thoughts. Not as truth, not as instruction, definitely not as punishment. See them for what they are, and look a bit more closely to see if there's anything to do at all, which sometimes there actually won't be. And if there is, breathe deeply. Relax your shoulders, your back, your jaw, or anywhere else that you feel tension, and then act from that place. Now, this might sound insensitive, but on the scene of a major accident, everyone involved will think that their injuries are the most serious. And based on their worldview, they are. But that is their perspective, not truth. You have the power to zoom out a bit and see what actually needs your sincere attention and what can be dealt with later or not at all. The same can be done with our angry thoughts and feelings. The goal here is to break the pattern of reactivity and impulsivity. When those are our motivations for action, they're very seldom healthy or productive. In fact, it's typically the opposite. You don't have to react to everything happening in your world right now. It's likely not life or death, so don't treat it that way. Let certain things be without thinking you need to do something about them right this moment. With time and space between you and the less severe patience of the mind, you'll be able to respond much more calmly when you do choose to take some kind of action. Something to be aware of is that the degree to which you are rushed, either in your inner world or outer world, when you're sped up, that's going to dictate how severely you experience anger. I want you to practice slowing down. Stop what you're doing. Don't power through and don't double down. Just like when you're lost when you're driving, you don't put the pedal to the metal because you'll miss your turn every single time. Instead, you slow the car down. And you may even do that weird thing where you turn down the music, like somehow that's going to help with your navigation skills, but actually it does, because getting quiet, whether the radio or your own blaring mind, is what allows you to see more clearly. An angry mind can only exist in the past or the future, never in the present. Slowing down takes all the parts of you that have spread to those imaginary constructs of time and slurps them all back together into the now, where you have full access to your ability to self-soothe and approach the situation with more calmness and clarity, like a true first responder. Also, make sure you check your self-talk about being angry in the first place. If you're prone to beating yourself up around feeling angry, it will either reinforce the anger or worse, introduce shame into the mix. Many people who have been taught that anger is bad will do even more damage by telling themselves how stupid or wrong they are for feeling anger to begin with. And that is like nitrous oxide in the Fast and the Furious movies for our anger. It accelerates it, throws us back in our chairs, and it can be volatile and explosive if not slowed down and put in check. Remember, our goal here is not judging or even forcibly removing anger from our lives. It's about noticing and acknowledging it without transferring our power to it. Right, Vin Diesel?
You're damn right.
Thanks. And one last thing on this. A powerful way to triage our thinking is to ask yourself powerful questions. Questions that get to the root of your experience and what might be holding you back from shifting out of one that isn't serving you. So the next time you're feeling angry, and without any self-judgment or blame or shame, ask yourself, am I willing to let go of this anger? Now, this may sound like a dumb question, but it's actually the fastest route to go from a nuclear reactor to a first responder. When you really slow down to answer that question, you might say no. You might decide to hold on to it. But at least then you have seen the truth of the choice you have made. That it isn't something thrust upon you that you have no control over. It stops the hijack because you take back control of the understanding of where this experience is actually coming from. It forces you to confront your role and your power. Now, on the other hand, you may say, yes, I am willing to let it go. And you don't even need to know how in that moment, because if you are truly willing, the heaviness of the anger will start to fade. Because again, that feeling of power starts to return home. Your self-leadership starts to surface. Your consciousness starts to increase, even just a little. And you may start to see self-directed action that can help you move from the ineffective state of anger and being a nuclear reactor to a much more effective one of being a first responder. Okay, so now that you have triaged your thinking, step 2 is to neutralize the threat. Okay, in movies, this usually means killing someone, but since we aren't making another Bourne Identity film, we're gonna take a slightly less violent take on this idea. What we're talking about here is to take what looks like a threat, like a bad thing that must be reacted to with anger, and instead look at it through a set of eyes that can see the neutral nature of the situation. Get it? Neutral eyes. In order to do that, we need to look beneath the surface of the anger and find the root cause. Something really interesting to notice is that you can't spell danger without anger. So now that you've started to triage your thinking and are in a slightly more conscious place where you can inquire into what's actually causing you to feel this way, you want to take a look at where you feel threatened. What is it about the current situation that has you feel like something is at risk, that you're in some kind of danger? This doesn't mean physical danger or that your life is at risk, but something is. Maybe you risk looking bad, being wrong, letting someone down, not knowing the answer, having to ask for help, feeling like you don't matter or that you or your ideas aren't important. Any of those things, and a ton more, can make us feel like we're in a corner that we have to fight our way out of with anger. Notice that most times you felt angry, you also felt like something was in danger. As strange as it sounds, when someone would cut me off in traffic and I would fly into a rage, it was because not only did I think my car and my life were in danger, but even more deeply, it actually triggered my not enoughness. Because the internal story will go, if we were enough and whole and important and worthy, no one would dare cut us off. It probably sounds ridiculous to hear it, but no one's ever accused anger of being the most rational person in the room. Practice seeing that 99.9% of the time, there's no actual danger. And what feels like danger is just uncomfortable feelings that need to be honored and processed at a deeper level. The more you can practice not being afraid of those feelings when they surface, the less hold anger will be able to have on you, and the more your vision will shift from the eyes of anger or wrongness to the eyes of neutrality. Speaking of fear, there was this really fascinating study that was done where they took subjects and had them watch a horrific, scary movie. And they measured their biometrics, they measured their physiological response, and of course, their heart rate increased, their breathing shallow, they were terrified. But then they took it a step further. They showed the participants a scary horror movie again, but this time, on the sides of the TV were headshots of the actors in the movie. Interestingly enough, when the headshots were present and the people watching the movie were able to see that these are real human beings, not actually being murdered on screen, their biological and physiological responses changed. They were more calm because they realized they were truly just watching a movie. Having the headshots there allowed them to not get sucked into the nightmare they were watching. We can do the same thing when we get caught up in our own daymares. We can wake up to the fact that what's causing our anger is not what we are thinking, but simply that we're taking those thoughts seriously. Not seeing that each thought is just the headshot of a character along with some fantasy dialogue that's wildly convincing, but that's still ultimately fantasy. The less seriously we take those thoughts in the moment, the quicker we start the shift from nuclear reactor to first responder, and we can more easily see the reality of the situation detached from our stories about it. The person cut you off in traffic. Yes, that's a fact. But believing he's a reckless, uncaring monster who probably hates puppies and puts the roll of toilet paper on the holder with the TP draped underneath like a psycho, well, that's a story. So now that you've triaged your thinking and neutralized your threat, it's time for step 3, which is to go from being a reactor to a creator. I love this quote from Nelson Mandela after being imprisoned for 27 years when he said, Yes, I was angry, and I was a little afraid. After all, I've not been free in so long. But when I felt that anger well up inside of me, I realized that if I hated them after I got outside that gate, then they would still have me. I wanted to be free, so I let it go. These are the words of someone who wants to be a creator in their life and not simply a reactor. Now, you may have even noticed that creator and reactor have the same exact letters in them, which I think is a beautiful reminder of the role of creativity and how we experience our world. Creativity is how we remix and reimagine our experience of life, and in this case, anger, to serve us instead of being our master. We want to take purposeful action that not only gets us back to a peaceful state, but also that actually helps us to grow through the experience. Notice that your angry mind is a terrible judge of what should be done next. It's not looking out for you, it's looking out for itself. You're just the host for something else's agenda. The real you never wants to lash out, to make someone else wrong, to make yourself suffer. You would never willingly choose that. So notice that you are not running the show when anger's present. A self-serving, confused entity with an agenda is. But the way of the first responder is different. And I'm going to share a few things that help me truly be a creator in my life, even when anger shows up at my front door with his classic rock CD collection, a bowl cut, and a 6-pack of wine coolers, because come on, what else would anger drink? All right, the first tool I want to share with you are my own personal mantras. Now, this is both a proactive and responsive practice. I practice programming myself with these when things are great and when I'm about to flip a table like one of the Real Housewives of New Jersey. Okay, my first mantra is, I am choosing curiosity and creativity as my new default stress response. Now, what does that mantra mean? Well, by default, I know that my stress response is overwhelm or anger or frustration. And so I want to create space in my world when the anger comes up so I can start responding from a place of curiosity and creativity. Curiosity meaning me getting curious and inquiring, where is this actually coming from? Like I talked about before, what do I feel is threatened? What do I feel is at risk? Where do I feel I'm in danger? And when I use that curiosity as my default response, I can then shift into creativity. Now that I know where it's coming from, what is the most productive thing I can do in this moment that will serve me in this situation? So in other words, this is about me not being so reactive and thinking I have to respond to everything that triggers me immediately. My next mantra that I practice is, I am compassionate and gentle on myself when I'm feeling angry. This is a big one, right? Because like I said before, we don't want to bring shame into the equation of feeling angry and then being angry that we're angry and going into that inception spiral of shame and self-judgment. And the last mantra I want to share with you is, I am practicing having a more casual relationship with my thinking. This means I'm slowing everything way down when I feel any anger coming on and trying my best to not attach to or take those thoughts seriously so that I can practice not being reactive and not panicking just because things aren't going according to plan. This also helps me to not be afraid of my feelings, which, as I talked about earlier, is a key component of being able to navigate them. Feel free to copy mine as is or write some for yourself, but the key here is that they have to feel true to you and they have to bring you back to truth. To help you shift your relationship to your anger, which oftentimes brings the level of clarity you need in order to know what to do next, or in other words, what action to take that will actually serve and help the situation. And lastly, I want you to practice what I call the 5 5s, which means think about the next 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years. Think about whatever you're angry about and ask yourself if it'll still matter at any of these time intervals. And based on that, ask whether it's worth it to do significant damage to your relationships or to your own quality of life to keep holding on to it. If you can see the truth that whatever it is that's causing you distress realistically will be a distant memory in 5 days, then ask yourself, how much of your own peace and happiness do you want to sacrifice in the now if a week from now, this thing won't even matter? This perspective will tone down any impulsivity or reactivity, and then you can take action on the situation at hand without the story of it being some permanent threat to your life. Now, there was a young girl who was writing a paper for school and came to her father and asked, "Dad, what's the difference between anger and rage?" The father replied, "Well, it's mostly a matter of degree. Let me show you what I mean." With that, the father went to the telephone and dialed a number at random. To the man who answered the phone, he said, "Hello, is Melvin there?" The man answered, "There's no one living here named Melvin. Why don't you learn to look up numbers before you call him?" And he slammed down the phone. "See," said the father to his daughter, "that man was not a bit happy with our call. He was probably very busy with something and we annoyed him." Now watch. The father dialed the number again. "Hello, is Melvin there?" asked the father. "Now look here, you just called this number and I told you there's no Melvin here. You've got a lot of nerve calling again." The receiver slammed down hard. The father turned to his daughter and said, "You see, that was anger. Now I'll show you what rage looks like." He dialed the same number, and when a violent voice roared, "Hello?" the father calmly said, "Hello, this is Melvin. Have there been any calls for me?" See, what the angry person on the phone is missing is what Buddhism teaches about the root of all of our problems just being a state of consciousness called avidya, or original ignorance. So as opposed to something much more severe, like some internal dialogue that says you're an angry person, it's instead much more of an innocent forgetfulness. The guy on the phone likely knows that he didn't have to get so upset at this person repeatedly calling him, but in the midst of the hijack, he simply forgot that fact. We can ask ourselves, when anger starts to bubble up, what am I forgetting about the way life works right now? What have I forgotten about the role I play in my own experience that could be really helpful to shift me from nuclear reactor to first responder? Remember, anger is simply contraction of consciousness. So all we need to do is expand that consciousness back out using any of the tools or insights I shared with you today, so we have a more realistic view of what's actually happening and what, if anything, we need to do about it. Anything else you want to add, Hulk?
I'm always angry.
I know, you big green teddy bear, but at least now you have some tools to manage it more effectively. That's all I've got for you today, folks. If you love this episode, please make sure to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to it on, and I'd be honored if you would take a minute to give us a 5-star rating and review so that more people have the chance to join our soul fam of ruiners. Screenshot and post it to your stories and tag me at the Jason Goldberg, and I'll show you some love back. And please feel free to DM me with your feedback or questions, and let's keep ruining shit together. Thank you so much for tuning in. I love y'all, and I'll see you next time. Peace.